Next session, we'll move on. We'll stay in mobility and, of course, also Elena. I'm very happy to have my friends from the Netherlands here. We're going to hear about a project that's similar to Barcelona. We did, what is it now? Again, 5-6 years ago or so?
Yeah,
or Maarten can explore all the details. So this is also one of the projects that we did under the previous Elena regime as an energy efficiency scheme, but with a clear stamp as on transport. Yeah. Our interest in this project was that, again, back to 2012, the different stakeholders from the project came to us and say, well, we want to transfer from the current diesel buses to zero emission. Yeah. There's a political ambition. We don't really know how, and we don't really know what it's going to cost. And the politicians say, well, we'd like to do it, but we need to know what will be the cost of it. So we supported this because the basic idea was to bring together more or less all the key stakeholders. So you have the provinces, the municipalities, but even also the operators and the manufacturers came together, found a cooperation to do the TCO models and the first tender documents for zero-emission buses. Yes. And that approach to cooperation and knowledge sharing and, of course, building a TCO model was what triggered our work with zero-emission. So, Maarten, that was it.
That was it. Thank you very much.
Maybe if you have a few slides, you can share them with us.
Yeah,
but anyway,
I'll share them with you. I'll start. I'll do it on this one. Okay. That will do. I'll skip this one fast. These were the reasons why we did it. You've got the 2020-40 initiative, the Covenant of Majors, and there was the ELENA facility that made it possible. You had to sign the contract with ELENA, and that contract wasn't signed by us. That contract was signed by a foundation in the Netherlands that was specially set up to speed up the transition to zero-emission public transport in the Netherlands as a whole. And both the province of Limburg, Peter Kuppers is here on behalf of the province of Limburg too. And we teamed up together with the foundation to get an action plan into the field for the introduction of zero-emission buses. And so the contract was between the foundation and ELENA. But that cost some time to get that in place because the foundation, in fact, was 3 people who, without any payment, were willing to go into that foundation and start pulling. So the provinces were asked to, first of all, pay for the 10% that ELENA wasn't paying for. Secondly, to be responsible in the case the foundation would go bankrupt. Thirdly, we had to loan to the foundation the last 30%, because ELENA used to deal with governments, and governments have money enough to pay the last 30% before ELENA pays at the end of the story, after the final reports are approved. In this case, the foundation had a liquidity problem for the last 30% of the cost of the project. So we loaned to the foundation that money and get it in return. We have it almost in return after the project was ended. It is ended last year. What were the goals and the objectives of the project? First of all, we had to bridge the gap for urgent funding for moving from diesel to electricity. We had some examples of it already. Also, we had to establish a staff project office that could do the job for us. And third of all, we wanted to accelerate the transition to zero-emission bus transport in the 2 provinces, of which all the concessions, there were 4 concessions in total, 3 in Brabant and 1 in Limburg. And they were all expiring in that period, 2014, 2, and 2 in 2016. So we had something to do. If we look at the facts and the figures, just for being clear, there was a technical assistance from the EIB from 2.5 million euros. And we all know that in the original contract, EIB said, well, that's nice, but you have to have investments for at least 25 times that amount of money. If you look at the investments we made in that 5 year that we run the projects and we did the concessions, we set the concessions in the market in that period, we had invoices for pilots for about 10 million, and those were invoices for money that was on top of the normal contract with the operators, and we're dealing with the cost difference between diesel on the one hand and electric vehicles on the other hand. And there were 150 million euros of investment in engagement through concessionaires. So in the contracts we had, in the concessions, there were investments of over 150 million, which led us to a leverage factor of 71.4 instead of the asked 25. In that case, it was a big success. The number of buses that are involved is 419, of which nowadays are driving already about 48, 63, about 65 somewhere are driving already, and the rest is following in the coming years in Limburg and southeast of Brabant. And if you look at CO2 reduction, there is a reduction of 58,000 tons a year.
Today?
No, if all those 490 buses are running later on. Something about the foundation, because that was a kind of special purpose vehicle to the transition in the Netherlands. It was established in July 2011. It was a legal entity governed by private law with a public service mission. It was founded for more than 50% by public sources and submitted to internal procedures of those public of those governments, in fact. It was a non-profit organization, and it was, as was said already, supported by all relevant stakeholders. So there was a kind of board within the foundation which consisted of PTAs, PTOs, manufacturers of both buses and energy and so on. But also, and that was important, the foundation could act as an independent actor to balance the different interests of the different stakeholders. Because you all have a bit different interest in that transition. And we also had the goal to facilitate and enable zero emission without the raise of the public investment volume. And that's interesting if you look at the two speeches in front of this. They all said, well, it is very expensive. And what we see in the Netherlands is that, yes, it is expensive, but the most we paid for on top of our normal expenses were the expenses in the pilots, whereas in the concessions, so that's procurement to the PTOs, we did not put any extra money in, and still we got the same, or in sometimes even more public transport, and also a transition within the contract from 0 to 100% zero emission. So it is possible. In some more detail, the successes, over 160 million on investments. We had pilot buses in 3 different cities. We had the start of 2 concessions in Brabant where pilots were part of the concession, and there was an option for a scale-up if TCO was neutral. Well, I can tell you that's in that case still not the case. So there we have still to pay for extra steps within the contract. And in the concession of Southeast Brabant, which started in 2016, the operator started with 43 18-meter electric buses in Eindhoven. You probably all saw it somewhere on the internet. It's a lot of films about it. We have 1 pilot in Eindhoven too with 2 hydrogen buses, and the contract states that in this case Hermes, which is a daughter of Connection and Transdev, will operate the whole concession zero emission in 2024. In the concession of Limburg, started in 2016, they started with 15 e-buses in the city of Venlo, 1 pilot e-bus, 3 pilot e-buses in Maastricht, and they will be zero emission in 2026. What we saw in the Netherlands is that there was a major breakthrough in that introduction of energy efficient zero emission buses in public transport. What also happened, and the foundation was one of the founders of that idea, is that we made an administrative agreement in the Netherlands with all of the authorities. So 12 provinces and 2 metropolitan regions, together with the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, made that agreement, and in that agreement we set our ambitions. And those ambitions are that we're willing to have our total public transport zero emission in 2030, first. Secondly, we will ask for new materials from new zero emission buses from 2025 onwards. We also stated something about energy that should be renewable and from regional origin from 2025 onwards. And last but not least, we want a minimal CO2 emission per travel per kilometer. For instance, there is dealing with your CO2 emissions on the side of the buses is one side of the medal. The other side of the medal is to get more people into your buses. That gives you also CO2 reductions if those people leave their cars at home or even don't buy a car. Some 530 buses will be zero emission in 2025, and we estimate that all over the Netherlands in 2025 there will be about 2,200 zero emission buses. The investment level we mentioned already. What's also important is that by starting that transition, you also see improving skills and growing knowledge of the personnel of the authority, but also of the personnel of the operator and the bus manufacturer. What you see is that in tenders in the Netherlands, where in former days the operator just look at the procurement papers, went to some manufacturers, asked for some pre-orders, offered to the authority, and after he got the bid, went back to the OEMs, say, okay, I'll buy your bus. What we now see is that there is a teaming up front before during the procurement period of a operator, a bus manufacturer, and someone who is keen on infrastructure. They all are needed to get a good offer on zero emission operations in a concession. And we also have transferred that knowledge to public and private stakeholders. We do that by sharing that knowledge in seminars and we also had that knowledge in a web-based TCO application. Something about the money, Maarten already said. We have invested in pilots, and we have invested in the normal operations, together 160 million. We also did some experiences with financial engineering. In the pilots, for instance, we started with our normal procedures, and that is that we pay monthly for a service. Then suddenly, in the project, the price, you start the project with a project budget, but in these kinds of projects where innovation is at stake, you never know what the real costs are. So after we were 3 years in the project, the cost went up, and we came above our project money. So we had to deal with it. Now, what did we do? We just stopped the monthly paying, got all the money up front, give a subsidy to the operator, and the operator could buy directly with money out of his pocket the buses. On the other hand, if we paid every month a little bit, he would go to a bank, he would go for money by the bank, had to pay 6% interest. And on that little project of 10 buses, which was estimated to cost about 7 million euros, it was 1.3 million euros that we could count down on the thing. And instead of 7 buses, we are now acquiring 9 buses in the same project. If you look at the concessions, of course, that's about tweaking your incentives in those concession papers. That went a little for the 2 concessions in the 2014 period. In Southeast Brabant, we were 2 years more experienced, and we tweaked them a little bit more to the zero emission, with a beautiful result. We had the same money, 8% more transport, and a transition to 100% zero emission. But it was a narrow escape, because there was only one operator that put in a bid, and the others ducked a little. So it was just on the rim of having pushed our buttons too far into the direction of zero emission. If the way of financing in the concessions is still the same as we did always. There is a subsidy to the PTO of about 60%, and the remaining 40% comes from ticket revenues. And it is the PTO that is responsible for the money. So if he has more travelers in the bus, the money is his. If he has less travelers in the bus, the risk is his. We always pay those 60% subsidy. The impact of the project in terms of environmental impacts. We had an energy use of 600,000 gigajoule and that was a reduction of 72% comparing diesel to electricity. We had a 300 and or about 63,000 tons CO2 emissions reduced to 100%, NOx emissions 33.5 tons, 100% reduction, and we had the small particle emission 1.9 ton reduction, which is a reduction of 36%. And why is that not 100%? You still have brakes and tires that has that result. So that will never be 100%, or you should have a kind of hovercraft or something and be lifted from the ground. There also was a reduction in noise levels in the city, also important, of course, about minus 20 decibels. And that led in Eindhoven, because those buses are very silent at low speeds. So on the platforms, they use the little bells from the trams we know of Amsterdam, for instance, and they use that to signal, hello, there is a bus coming. Notice, keep notice. Mind the bus, mind the bus. And also you had better working conditions for staff and maintenance and support personnel, because instead of having a dirty diesel bus in your depot, you only have those nice, silent, non-emitting, zero-emission buses in your depots. The total cost of ownership, because electric buses is not only about buying buses and about buying infrastructure, it's also about exploiting those buses. And then you have to deal with what is the price of electricity, what is the price of your maintenance. So you should look at the complete life cycle for a good insight in what it will cost you. And besides that, and it is mentioned already, you also could look to sustainability and the costs of sustainability. And the foundation made a total cost of ownership model that is nowadays maintained by one of the largest knowledge institutes in the Netherlands for mobility, the CROA. And it's a model that is composed of 4 components. First of all, you look at energy and infrastructure, you look at the vehicle, you look at the routes, the lengths, the frequencies, the speed, the energy that is needed on that route. But we also look at sustainability. You look to the energy consumption from well to wheel, you look to the emissions from well to wheel, you look to the noise, you look to employment of new businesses in your region, and all those effects are also in the model monitorized. So you can also see what nowadays a ton CO2 costs you if you have to buy it in brackets. That's also implemented in this model. You can put in different scenarios, combinations of services, combinations of parameters, and you get financial outcomes and sustainability outcomes. You get a TCO of the vehicle, you get a cash flow for the vehicle, you get TCO infrastructure, you get them combined, and you can see what climate, energy, air quality effects are. If you want, you can all use that tool. It's an open tool. I'll put the link to it in the end of this and remail the things so everybody can see it and start using it. It can help you in making your decisions on these kinds of projects. There are also some suggestions to the AIB. Using such a special purpose vehicle, was a bit tricky, and whereas the EIB is in favor of innovative initiatives, it still is a bank, and it still is a kind of inflexible in dealing with the new new possibilities. So maybe we should. That's a recommendation. Look at some more flexibility. We also had some financial limitations, pre-financing the SPV, so the foundation. That was also a part of the discussions. Flexibility regarding the changes in the project plan. Innovation never goes according to plan. Your plan always changes during the pilot, and some more flexibility would be reasonable. And we also coped with a lot of difference in personnel. That was a setback in the way that we had time over time had to introduce our project to new staff members at the EIB. And it was a pity of the time we spent in it, because that time had, went not to the right type of work. But in the end, we were very happy with the money the EIB spent at us. What did we learn? We learned to think not within boundaries, but over boundaries. We learned that you have to pool, that a demand pool by the public transport authorities is a good way to expedite the transition. Think in terms of total cost of ownership, not only look at what a bus cost or what infrastructure cost. Look at how you can procure on the right, on the good way. Look at different times of your concession. The normal concessions in the Netherlands are 12 years. It is possible to make it longer. Limburg used 15 years, and that was possible because it was a combined concession with buses and trains, which are most of the time longer. And you got longer times to pay back your money, and your costs will be lower. Take procurement step by step. As we see it in Barcelona, for instance, you see that it can be stepwise. You can learn every time by every step, and use the lessons you learned in the next step. Most of the time in the Netherlands, so when you want to have a transition within the contract, I have never seen any positive results. Within the contract, if you have a contract and you say to the operator, I want zero emission, we say, okay, let's draw our wallet, you pay, I deliver. But when we change from one operator to another, when we put into procurement a concession, things change. Then suddenly there is a kind of competition between the operators, and then things start to move. At least that is the experience we have in the Netherlands. The foundation was a valuable instrument as an in-between person in that transition, and we also think that we should have more flexible project conditions. What are the next steps? We still have ongoing pilots. We still have monitoring projects. We are also introducing more fuel cell buses together with 2 other provinces. Brabant is stepped in JIVE 2 from the fuel cell hydrogen joint undertaking, and in that project we try to operate 50 buses in the Netherlands. We prepare new concessions. The 2 concessions in East and West Brabant are due to expire in 2022 and 2024, and with the experience in the Netherlands, I think in those procurement papers there probably will be one line. The buses are zero emission dots. I think it's possible. And the TCO web application is still maintained by CROE, and it can be used all over the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we are also quite happy with the project. As you said, we started back in 2011, many years ago. It was completed officially last year. And we've learned a lot also on our side since then. So what was innovative in 2011 and was a bit of a struggle for you is something that have inspired us, and we have changed or adapted many of the measures we are working now. So as we talked about with Amsterdam this morning, it's always difficult to be the first one. Yeah. And there's no extra prize for that. You just get a chance to come out and promote yourself from time to time. But I think we had a very good project, and especially as we talked about a number of times already, the TCO model and the fact that you need to change your procurement scheme is something that is very generic, and everybody has to look into that when they approach it.
And not only the procurement schemes, but you probably also have to, the operator has to change his operation schemes.
Yeah.
Because the system of those new zero emission buses are not the same as the system of the diesel buses. And it's easier for a PTO when you just can put in electric buses instead of diesel buses and go on with the business as they are used to. But that's not the question.
All right, we have time for questions, comments, some 10 minutes before the coffee break.
Thank you. My name is Nicholas Bates. I'm the Dutch Urban Envoy. I have a question regarding technology and investment. If I understood you correctly, you're betting, if you like, for zero emission on 3 systems. There's electric buses, hydrogen buses, fuel cell buses. You started in 2011 with a lot of new things. Where do you stand today? Because the project's not finished. Which of the 3 technologies is going to win? What happens if you have to write off this one technology vis-à-vis another? How is the lifespan of the technology you used with the original first pilot bus?
We started in 2012 with an ambition of our government, and that ambition was in 2025 our buses are zero emission. Later on, the first steps on that discussion were, what are we going to do? Are we going for hybrid buses? Are we going for gas buses? Are we going, whatever? We said, no, we're going for 100% zero emission. And at those days, there were 2 types of buses that could meet those requirements. There's on the one hand, an electric bus with a battery, and on the other hand, an electric bus with a fuel cell. That was it. Do we mind which buses are driving in our provinces? No, we do not mind at all. In fact, it's not our business. If we procure functionally. So we say to the operator, well, here you have our lines, about 80% of those lines you have to offer, and we'll see what you offer. Are we involved in hydrogen? Yes, we are involved in hydrogen. Why are we involved in hydrogen? It's one of the 2 type of buses that meet our requirement. That's 1. 2, hydrogen is also in other policy themes a promising thing. maybe we could get energy from sources as wind and sun into hydrogen for storage, and then later on use that hydrogen as a fuel for our buses and cars. Maybe, I don't know where it ends. Maybe hydrogen wins, maybe hydrogen is still a hype. We are putting some money in hydrogen pilots just to keep that market open. And if nobody ever invests in hydrogen at this moment, one thing is sure, it will never land. That's the way where we are dealing with it. But finally, it's not of our business what type of buses they will drive.
There was a gentleman in the back there.
Hello, Wolfgang Backhaus from Mobrecht Consult. I have two questions. First, did I understand it right that the activities on capacity building and the tool development, the TCO tool, were part of the technical assistance funded by Elena?
Yes?
Okay. And the second one, have you thought and also discussed about joint procurement with your authorities?
Yes. We are doing a pilot on shared procurement within the Jive 2 project. 3 provinces which are planning to put one tender on the market for 50 buses, whereas the 2 provinces will take 20 of those buses and 1 province 10. Did we speak about joint procurement all over the Netherlands? Well, we spoke about it, but that's not so easy to deal with, because the PTAs are all independent in the Netherlands, and it's a political dialogue. So all the governments of the 12 provinces will need to agree upon joint procurement. And, well, that's not so easy, and I don't know whether that will arrive or not. I think not, but okay. In some special cases it might be nice.
Just a small comment from me on the capacity building. The way Elena works is that the grant can be used to cover your staff costs or hiring external experts. And in the application you describe a budget for the mix of those and the positions and so on. And we encourage our beneficiaries to actually put emphasis on the fact that they can either hire new staff or second staff to a specific task for a certain period of time with that specific purpose to increase the capacities of that organization, so that, for example, when we heard with Barcelona, then we can do the first phase and then people will have a knowledge of procurement and technology and so on, and then they are more capable of doing the next phase more professionally, more confident, whatever. So that's one of the key purposes of the tool, to actually facilitate that.
And the tool is not developed for this is the truth. It's developed for having the good conversation about the different aspects of the transition between the stakeholders. Because every bus manufacturer and every PTO has its own TCO model, which he uses for preparing orders to the PTAs. But it can be used to have the same kind of language between the different stakeholders.
Now you get it.
Yeah? Oh,
I was delayed on my bike. So I have two. I really like your project. I have 2 practical questions. One is, I understand that the buses are owned by your concessionaire.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
We were visited by the PTO of Seattle, from the other side of the world, basically, and they said that in some states, in the United States, the cities co-own pools of buses, pools of electric buses. And then basically with each concession, the concession can take some of these buses out of the pool. So would that's my first question, would that be appealing to you? And the second question is even more practical and maybe Dutch. So you've bought many buses. Have you seen the price coming down, and by how much?
We get a price for driven kilometers.
Okay.
So we don't see the price of the buses. Do the buses go down, the prices go down? Yes, they do go down, because in the pilots we used, we had a pilot of 10 buses in 's-Hertogenbosch in 3 batches. The first batch was 3, the second batch was to be 4, and the third batch was to be 3 again. After we had the first batch ready and up in the project, we just looked what went around on this on the table, and both the operator and the bus manufacturer said, well, our learning curve is going that fast up that we have no interest in 3 phases anymore, let's do 2 phases. And that ended up in 12 buses in the end, instead of 10 where we at the start. So the price went already down, and I stated it in one of the answers in the former discussions. In the first phase, we had to pay for the guarantee on the battery, because there were extra costs for the bus manufacturer and the PTO. And in the second phase, that wasn't needed anymore, because then we got, the first phase was 10 years, and then now it was at the start certain that those batteries wouldn't work for 10 years. They work for 4 or 5 years maybe. 2 years later, when the project was for the second batch only 7 years till the end of the concession, the guarantee of the batteries wasn't on our expense anymore, because the manufacturer of the batteries guaranteed its function for 7 years. So you see things go down.
If I may add something, we are regional authorities, and it is not very likely to have a pool of buses or trains, because we are not equipped for that. So that's why we leave it at the transport companies.
But there is in all over the Netherlands, there is some discussions about not in particular the buses, but to the infrastructure. Whether now we procure functionally, so the buses and the infrastructure are at the possession of the PTO. But there are some discussions in the Netherlands if that is the most optional situation, because that infrastructure is more or less a strategic asset, as are the depots and so on, and that strategic asset is then in the hands of one of the PTOs, which is also a possible new winner of the next concession. And they own then for 8 years that asset. So they know everything of it. They know all the habits of that infrastructure. So you could pose that by having that, your playing field is not level anymore. But then we should break it in two and say, well, infrastructure is our part as the PTA, and we procure it just as we procure the services with the buses. And then we come close to that what happens in Amsterdam, The Hague and Rotterdam, where you have combined public transport of metro, trams and buses. For Amsterdam, investments in bus infrastructure is not a big issue. If you look at what they spend yearly on maintenance of tram, metro infrastructure, those infrastructures for buses is all small money. This depends on how the situation is.
Just, it's about the tool. What's the result of the tool? Is euro per mile, euro per kilometer, or the TCO tool?
It's, I think, euros per kilometer.
Okay, so it's different.
But there are different. You can stretch it. You can. There are cash flows on the total project you put into the tool.
And so you can compare diesel buses and
Yeah.
electric ones.
Yeah.
And so what's after how many years you have the same prices? Did you make
Yeah,
some calculation?
that's hard to say in general because
No. But in your case, I mean, if you
No,
make a
the-
simulation.
We already procured some of the concessions before the tool was completely ready. So we didn't have that large an experience. But if you look what we hear in the Netherlands, at least, PTOs and bus manufacturers states that normally within urban areas, the TCO of a diesel bus is more or less already equal to diesel. But if you go to more suburban areas where the distance of the bus is larger and the speeds are higher, then you have still a hard thing to get a TCO.
And I have a question for you on this tool. Since now it's developed and I guess it's available also in English, will you require the use of this tool for any other, project on transport?
No. It's available. And that's actually also a key point about Elena as a facility in principle. There's an obligation on a beneficiary to share the outcomes of this project. So in this case, in the contract we had with the foundation, there's a clear saying where you should actually be ready to share your knowledge with whoever wants to have access to it. In this case, I mean access to the tool, but also coming and sharing knowledge to us. So this is not an available tool. This is something you can use. It's a very good simulation tool. I actually tried it on a couple of times because you can play with what is your baseline. Is it diesel? Is it Euro 6? Whatever. You can play with interest rate, contract periods, and so on. So you can change the settings in different ways, and then you will see different results on the outcome. So this is just a support for whoever wants to use it. It's not mandatory that you use it when you apply to us. So that's something you can do. I had another comment, but I forgot what it was. Any final questions? Yeah.
Pedro, fuel cells and hydrogen jet undertaking. I was wondering, throughout your pilot projects, did you at some point realize that by going for the low-hanging fruits, like battery buses for short distance, commuting trips, you would somehow get locked in a technology, namely for the infrastructure, that would prevent you afterwards to move to the technology that would actually fit your needs for the whole system?
It's one of the discussions that is going on, yes. That's one of the things where I think, well, we talked about owning the infrastructure. If we go for that, we need to look at it very carefully. Peter already said so. We don't have the knowledge anymore. We had it in former days when we owned our own buses, but that is, well, in the Netherlands about 20 years ago, I think. So there is no knowledge within our own organization to get that done. And so on the one hand I say yes, there is something to say to own your infrastructure. On the other hand, there is a new system emerging, and that system is developing itself. And maybe we should leave that development the first 5 or 10 years to those who has the most insight in what is necessary and what is possible in that way. And that is not the PTA, in my point of view, but that are the PTOs, the manufacturers, and service providers in that field.
Okay, we spent 10 minutes of the coffee break. But we could spend 10 more if you like, but are there any final questions? Or I guess, Maarten, you are available?
Yeah, I'm still
the afternoon
here
if
for an
somebody
hour.
wants to talk to you. So I think we'll close it now and give a hand to Maarten for an excellent presentation.
Thank you.